Hi, and welcome to season 10. We're exploring pricing, and we've gone through a lot of different elements. Pricing is very interesting. It's just there's so many different areas, and it's so important. So we're going to get into how do you practically price today. I'm Mary Abazia, and with me is Tom Spitali and Sean Wellham. And we're all from Impact Planning Group across the world. And Sean, let's serve this up to you, and you get this party started.
Okay, so we've talked about revenue models, the razor and razor blades model, and the different ways, the freemium model. If you want to hear the full detail, listen to our previous podcast on this. I wanted to move from the models itself to the actual physical way that money is exchanged and the structure of pricing, if you like, because there's a lot of different models out there, and many of them are dependent on the type of business that operates them. They're not universally available across all businesses and industries. But what I wanted to do was maybe kick around a few of them, because I'm of the view that the more of these specific pricing methods that you understand, the more you can consider them and think, is there any aspect of this that I could bring in to my own business? So I'll kick off with one and we'll just boot around, see where this goes. Airlines and hotels have a revenue management process where they pretty much understand the value of the sorts of demand that they get. The simplest way is think of trying to book an airline ticket during the holidays. You're going to pay a lot of money for that. And even outside of those specific areas, if you book a flight that goes over a weekend, you'll pay a lot less for it because they're trying to attract people that maybe want to travel over a weekend. So more vacationers or casual travelers than business people who typically don't want to spend a weekend away from home. So there's aspects of understanding the demand equation and pricing according to that. Hotels is another one. That if you want to stay in a hotel in Vegas, you're either going to pay top dollar because maybe there's a big event on, or if it's quiet in terms of event, there's no world championship fight, there's no big expo, there's a massive surplus of rooms and you can get dirt cheap rooms to stay in Vegas. And it's all about understanding at which point you price based on the demand, and more importantly, how you optimize that price, because the temptation would be to discount the stuff you haven't used, right? You've only got so many hotels.
Well, I wanted to, if you peeled all of that back, there's segmentation right underneath it. And so the cool thing about that is if you're setting the price and you're figuring out those segmentations and where, if they are a business traveler or a leisure one, or that there's certain, sports fanatic, you can start to unlock that more. And if you're the opposite, if you're on the buying end of it, knowing that you're not in that segment that's happening, you can take advantage of those. One of my favorite pricing models was if a can of paint was priced like the airlines. And it's very funny, where the guy comes up to the counter with a can of paint and then and it said $2 on the shelf, but now it's $5. And as it gets closer to when he's going to buy it, it costs him more. And he's going to paint it over the week. He's going to paint his house over the weekend. Well, that'll cost you $10 more. So it was a nice way to show that there's such a difference in these industries. Tom, what's one of your favorite industry pricing models?
Well, I actually wanted to talk a little bit more, Mary, rather than answer that question, is talk a little bit more about, this is kind of related to segmentation, is that it seems like if you're, say, a B2B business and you're wondering if you can do this demand-based pricing, I think the expectations of your customer are really, really important. I mean, if you have had a more traditional pricing model in the past, and you start to implement a demand-based pricing that's actually quite dynamic. I mean, everybody has to talk about and negotiate price increases periodically with their customers. But I'm talking about more like a hotel or an airline model where it's really dynamic and changes really, really quickly. If you ever would do that and your customers weren't used to it, it might be pretty difficult to execute on it. However, I think that there's situations where you can be really explicit about sort of like risk sharing. Again, this might be certain segments, Mary, where people are willing to engage in that kind of dynamic pricing with you, and they want to play the odds, so to speak, right? They're willing to risk maybe having to pay a higher price at other times to be able to get an absolute rock bottom price when the demand and supply, so you can maybe implement demand and supply warrant it. So maybe you can, implement that kind of a pricing approach for people who have said, all right, I'm game. I'm willing to do that. But I do think that kind of dynamic pricing has to be really explicit. You expect it at the airlines, right? You expect it with hotels. You expect it actually even at the golf course, And when you know to expect it, you realize sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But if you're buying steel, well, maybe steel is actually something that you would expect. Maybe if you're buying, I don't know, office supplies, whatever. If you don't expect it and you see this kind of fluctuation, you wonder what the heck's going on, and you look for maybe a more of a stable.
I think you're hitting on something really important, is that we're always thinking about the benefits or the values. But when you listen to financial reports, Bloomberg, they always talk about what's the risk factor. And I noticed that we don't talk about risk factors as much in marketing. And yet, if you really understand what a patient, what a patient, doctor, healthcare, or wherever your customers' risks are, maybe that still is the risk is that you have overseas suppliers, and there's the risk of not getting your inventory or price fluctuations. That actually can help you figure out how you can use pricing as a big lever to help them mitigate that risk in some way. So I think even, especially in the industrial world, it's really an interesting way to think about pricing.
I think the fundamentals of what we call the airline pricing model, the revenue management model, is really two parts. One is rewarding a degree of future certainty. So if someone says, I want to buy a ticket for a flight in September of next year, that's revenue you can pretty much take to the bank. It's a revenue stream in the future, and you'll apply a relevant discount for the value of having that certainty. When it's urgent, when someone says, I need to be in Seattle tomorrow, it's like, well, guess what, buddy? You're going to pay for that. Every business or many businesses should be able to look at that continuum between urgency and pre-planning, and maybe offer pricing that rewards the pre-planning, where there's a mutual benefit of future revenue stream certainty for you and a good price for the customer, and recognize that urgency when someone says, I must have this done, I must get this done by Tuesday. Are you pricing in? Because that urgency is a value to the customer, and as a consequence, we should capture it. And that's the essence, I think, of the revenue pricing. I've got another one, price skimming, which always sounds very negative to me, but it literally means when you've got a new product, you charge top dollar, and they call it riding down the demand curve. The early adopters will pay more for it. It occurred to me, I was looking on Netflix, and you've got a choice on Netflix. You can watch movies that are part of your package, or you can pay a premium, or maybe it was Amazon Prime, one of the services you could pay to rent a more current movie. And I thought that's a great example of skimming. It's like, if you really want to see this latest movie that's just finished its cinema run, then you can pay and rent it on your TV at home, or you can wait and it will be part of the package deal. It'll be part of your bundle in maybe 6 months. And that idea of charging top dollar for those that just can't wait, the early adopters, the impatient, you see it in iPhone, right? You get the new latest model iPhone. Guess what happens to the previous iPhone? It drops in price. If you're willing to stay one behind the current iPhone, you'll get a better deal maybe, or a cheaper deal. So price skimming is the other one I wanted to kick around, that idea. Do we see that people leverage that enough, capture that early demand and maximize the returns?
I don't know if they do. I mean, I think some do. I think I see the other tendency sometimes when people are coming out with something new and they want to gain a whole bunch of market share. And so they say, well, let's go out with this new innovative product and let's price it really aggressively, and we'll raise the price later. And I know that the three of us would say, well, warning, warning, warning. The hardest thing to do in business is to raise your price. So, going in the opposite direction can be difficult. But I think it in some cases it might be warranted. It just depends on the amount of risk that's inherent around the new product, right? Is it something that is definitely and demonstrably better than what's on the market? Or is it something that people need to be convinced or to trial a while before they know if it's better? I think in those different situations, you might take different stances towards price skimming. But I personally, when I'm advising clients, I'm typically, Sean, going with the ride the wave, start high and ride the wave down, because it's just really difficult to get more price from, to take price higher later.
I have a good example of this. Very recently, Biogen just came out with their Alzheimer's drug. And Tom, that's a really good example where one doesn't exist. I mean, we know that for decades, companies have been trying to crack this code, and Biogen has in some way, and they're charging $56,000 a year. And there was an uproar, how can you be charging us so much? And I listened to an interview with some of the leaders, and they number one had a lot of confidence in saying this drug is, so important to so many people, and it's the first of its kind, and we did a lot of research, and we need that money to continue that research. So they didn't back down at all, and they didn't apologize. They said this is the right price for it. And I thought, with that kind of conviction, that's interesting when you do price skim, as you're saying, Sean, and you have something very unique in the market, and you're able to get your internal organization to align around that. That's pretty remarkable. I think Lilly's next to come out. It'll be interesting to see what their price is relative to this 56,000.
I think there's an art to it for the majority of businesses that aren't in the patent protected products, which obviously have a slightly different dynamic. It's still very relevant. But for most people, I think the biggest challenge with price skimming is to not annoy the 10% of your early adopter customers. Because if they all said, oh, this is a great new piece of software or a great new product, and we're paying this launch price, and then they see in 12, 18 months that it's maybe 30% discount, they may well be agreed or think like, well, hang on, I want some money back. I want a rebate, which is one of the options. So there's a real art in how you position that, and making sure that if you are charging top dollar for the early adopters, that they get some benefit, some exclusivity, some extra source that makes it worth their while, because you don't want to have those are not the sort of customers you want to annoy in the long term. So finding that sweet spot be how you price and how you can justify and rationalize subsequent discounting is an important consideration as well.
I've seen something too that's the opposite of that, kind of like a roller coaster, where companies are trying to get rid of products at the end of its life, whether it's patent protected or not. And so they can only discount so far, but there's a group of people that are so loyal that they start increasing the price to try to get people to move away from it. And in some cases, companies go, we kept raising the price and people kept buying it. So they had to reconsider that maybe there was, a really solid segment that was going to continue to buy it, because at any price they were not going to stop buying it. So that's kind of that opposite end.
It's a challenging experiment, isn't it? Because the only real way that you'll find out if your price increase will cost you huge amounts of volume is to do it, at which point it's a little bit too late. It's like you'll never know until you do it. And it's not always the most risk-free way of approaching things. But isn't it funny how often you hear when people don't need the business, or trying to wind down a product line, or are trying to move away from a sector, and they choose the mechanism of increasing pricing to do it, how often they end up with a more profitable product, because there's a core. Back to the segmentation, right? I think all roads lead to segmentation. There's some customers that will just keep paying within a range of reasonableness, right? No one's going to go bankrupt to buy your product, but there'll be people that have a higher price tolerance than others. And that's another element of this price skimming that maybe, we should think through.
Yeah. And always doing some kind of if you don't know don't commit too much to say, okay, we dropped our price, 30%, but rather we have an exclusive deal. So you kind of test the waters with a promotional price for a very short period of time to see if you actually are on the right road or not, as opposed to just, significantly dropping it. You can't do hey, we got a special deal for you. We're going to charge you 30% more. You can't go that way, but you could always do the promotion deal going down.
You know what a big pricing mistake, since we're talking about charging like different prices at either different times or to different customers, the one thing that just drives me nuts, because I think it's a terrible practice, is when companies come out with deals for new customers only. Nothing makes less sense to me. Now, I have to admit, my background before I worked with Impact was in customer experience management, and we were all into the economics of customer loyalty and how profitable it is to just sell more to existing customers, and all of that has been proven by people like Frederick Reichheld and others, that the economics of that is great. So that when somebody comes out with a discount for new customers only, I know personally that makes me really mad. I don't know about you guys. If I'm an existing customer, it makes me mad that I can't get the same deal after I've demonstrated loyalty to the company.
The key is this is the reality, right? Versus the theory. There was an interview I saw a while ago with a boss of one of the cable companies. I don't know which one it was for sure, so I'm not going to mention it. But basically was asked, how happy are your customers? How much of your content do they enjoy? Do they rate the programs that you put out? And he said, I don't care. All I care about is that they're not so unhappy that they cancel the contract. And of course, reality is it takes a lot for people to cancel their contract. And that's why things like new discount or discounts for new customers work, because if there was a corresponding fall off of existing customers, if people didn't just get annoyed, but canceled their contract or went somewhere else, then it wouldn't happen. It's one of those things where we don't like it to be that way, but economically it must work or they wouldn't keep doing it. So it's one of those things where it's sort of down to us to turn that anger into action, or just put up with the consequences of it, because it seems to be pretty prevalent. New customers, extra discount, extra minutes.
In some industries it is. I think with the companies that are benefiting from it, there's a degree of inertia. I mean, they're betting on inertia, right? They're betting on the fact that the people that are loyal customers that aren't getting the deal aren't going to be, as your CEO said there, Sean, that you talked about, as long as they're not mad enough to change, I don't care. But the economics of many of the industries that we deal in, like the B2B industries, each individual customer and account is worth so much. I mean, the cable business, it's a marginal amount, but in the businesses where it really, really matters, I would never suggest, where the ticket price or the average annual revenues is really high, I would never recommend it.
I agree. And to be clear, I'm not advocating for that. And I think you're right. It doesn't really affect the businesses that we operate in, because the idea of saying, one, I don't care is ridiculous, and saying, two, I'm going to give discounts to new customers, my existing customers can pay that's suicide. It just would not work. It's commercial suicide. But in those situations where you're getting a small amount of revenue from a million different customers, the sad fact is, and it's more of a lament than a support, is you can do that, and people will go, I'm so mad, I'm not going to take a squirrel, and they just off doing something else, and they'll keep paying the monthly subs.
But I do think the CEO should shut his mouth. Why tempt fate like that? And say, I don't care in the press. I don't care.
And a lot of times it's because they have pricing power. I mean, that's why pricing, I think, is so fascinating. There's so many elements to it. And, the guy was obviously not smart to stand up and say that, but they have tremendous pricing power, because you don't have a lot of options often as to other cable companies or other garbage collection services, which, by the way, are in the same area of customer satisfaction as cable companies. So it comes down to, how much of a leverage do you have, because you're the only game in town, so anyway, I think we have to wrap this up, but any closing thoughts as we go?
I would
Tom?
just say that the when you look at pricing models, we haven't covered them all. You've got traditional ones, discounting, two-part tariffs, rebates. So you've got price optimization, finding that one price that will maximize your contribution given your capacity and so forth. There's all sorts of things. What I would say is, as you look outside of your own business, look at every other business of totally different, of hotels, of pharmaceuticals, of leisure, of sporting events. Look at how their revenue streams come together. Just ask, how is any aspect of this that I could bring into play? Always be curious about pricing and just say, what could we do differently? And it's not about one-way streets, not about just increasing the bottom line. It's about doing it through making as many people happy as possible, giving good deals to people, and finding where the best places are for you to increase your margins. So be curious and look outside of your own market.
Love it. Love it. We hope that you have a few ideas to apply to your business. And we have, 9 other series. So at any point, if you'd like to hear more, please visit us on the accidentalmarketer.com or anywhere that you get your podcast. So thank you very much.